So what is evolved coaching? It actually follows principles of evolution, how life evolved to move, not just humans, but all of life, and how movement can actually devolve. So here we have four quadrupedal animals, an elephant on the left, a lion in the middle, a seal on the right. What I want you to notice is all of their shoulder blades are vertical and parallel with their humerus. In embryo, we have the same thing. And then as we mature and grow, our shoulder blades move to our spine or back onto our back. The problem is if we don't move literally as we evolved to, we will devolve. That shoulder blades can devolve back to quadrupedal patterns. And when that happens, an injury is likely to happen later. And what you need to do is re-evolve the shoulder blade or other limbs in other cases to be on the back.
This whole thing is evolved coaching isn't just a cheeky play on words. It's very much about evolution. And one of the main drivers for evolution or main principles is these three words is ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. And what that means is someone's individual development, a certain organism, a human, a cat, a donkey, whatever, they repeat certain evolutionary ancestral stages from previous history and relationships. That's what those three things mean. And what I want to show you is how that comes to life with movement. When athletes don't have the environments that keep our human movement patterns sufficient, they devolve. And so what you see with this kid here is he was very reluctant to bend his wrists. He devolved to a quadrupedal pattern within his arms. His shoulder blades would wing. He did not bend through his wrist. He would only bend through his metacarpal joints, just like the lion and the elephant here on the right and that seal skeleton there. And the thing is, it's probably one thing before another that maybe his shoulder blade devolved first to the side of the rib cage before his hand started to devolve as well. And so these movement patterns just show a maladaptation or a devolution of how he used his muscles. And
so one of the other ways the human body can actually devolve, as in resorting to more primitive patterns of locomotion, is at the hand and the wrist, where we see weight-bearing strategies on the fingers instead of on the palm with a bent wrist. So when we see people with excess finger extension and not utilizing wrist extension and weight bearing, we get insight to that their whole shoulder and arm may have been devolved, and that they likely have a higher risk of injury than is normal, because when the body moves in a strategy that is not in accordance or with the human structure of what our joints and muscles are supposed to do or how they evolved to do, risk of injury is very high. So let's talk about a term called degeneracy. This is a term from the research to describe how movement changes. And it's the ability of elements that are structurally different to perform the same function or get the same output. So with Haley here, who has a very loose sternoclavicular joint, and this last year had surgery on her supraspinatus, we see elements that are structurally different changing to perform the same output. Because her left sternoclavicular joint is so loose, we see her deltoid and pec fibers have changed and have adapted to help her accomplish what she needs to accomplish. So another form of commonly seen degeneracy is what you have here, which is wrist extension being substituted or replaced by finger extension. You might see this more commonly with people who walk on their toes, where we see hip extension and dorsiflexion substituted by toe extension or plantar flexion at a different sequence in time, which clears space for the swing leg. In the shoulders here, what you see is his right shoulder. He's substituting glenohumeral joint motion, shoulder motion, with extra shoulder blade rotation. And again, when the body stays degenerated for too long, risk of injury goes up. So in my course, I teach people how to re-evolve the body to get things to move more or less how we were designed to move or how we evolved to move. So what you'll see here is another form of degeneracy, which is when somebody doesn't really use their legs to change direction. And so what you'll see is he'll put his leg out and it'll bend, but look how much his spine absorbs the load for him to change direction. In my class and in my course, I call this an aquatic devolution and then guide people as to how to evolve it more to a human pattern. But this is not going to be a powerful position. And furthermore, I would think it leads to some risk of injury. And where that injury could fall, it's hard to say. But evolving the movement back to human patterns with the spine staying more or less somewhat neutral and him bending the leg to absorb the load and then change direction, it's not only going to be what I would say is a safer position, but also a more powerful position. So this next form of degeneracy is a simple but subtle one. This is Clayton, a left-handed pitcher who used to have a lot of elbow pain. It actually stopped him from throwing for about 8 months until we found each other. And so what you can see here is that he's substituting supination of his wrist with pinky motion of his hand. And so because it would yield the same output, like what degeneracy defines it as, he goes about his day and doesn't notice the difference. But when I know that he should be able to get his wrist to turn more based on kind of normal anatomy, I get insight into what he needs for his training and how to help his elbow by seeing where this degeneracy falls or where it afflicts him.